Welcome to this 10-minute update from LexisPSL Banking Finance. This month we focus on structured finance and derivatives. I'm Jacqueline Cook and I'm joined by my colleague Emma Millington.
Hello.
July brought some interesting developments. ISDA published an amendment agreement relating to Section 2A3 of the ISDA Master Agreement. Secondly, the Court of Appeal delivered its judgment in the Napier Park case, illustrating the iterative approach to interpretation of contracts in a CLO transaction. And thirdly, the UK became the first state in the Western world to issue sovereign Sukuk. The offer of 200 million Sukuk maturing in 2022 was backed by rental income from government properties and was oversubscribed with a profit rate of 2.036% in line with gilts of a similar maturity. But today we want to focus on the first two developments. Let me hand you over to Emma to look at the ISDA Amendment Agreement.
On 19th of June, ISDA published an amendment agreement, which means parties can bilaterally amend their ISDA Master Agreement. Section 2A3 is a condition precedent to payment and delivery obligations arising out of transactions governed by the ISDA Master Agreement. It means that if an event of default or potential event of default occurs, the non-defaulting party may suspend payments or deliveries to the defaulting party while such event is continuing. The problem with the clause is that there are no time restrictions on the suspension, meaning that a non-defaulting party can choose not to close out its transaction while the mark-to-market price is not in its favour. It may therefore suspend payments indefinitely while it is out of the money. This was first highlighted in 2003 by the Supreme Court of New South Wales in Enron and TXU Electricity. It led to discussions by the Financial Markets Law Commission in 2004 as to whether the clause could be considered a walkaway clause. Following the collapse of Lehman's, the US case of Metavante, and various High Court decisions in the UK which were contradictory, the UK Treasury published a paper in 2009 suggesting that a time limit should be imposed on 2A3. 4 key judgments were appealed in the Court of Appeal in 2011, whereby the court clarified the interpretation of 2A3, saying that payment obligations would remain suspended while the condition precedent remained unfilled, but would not be extinguished by reason of maturity of the transaction, and that amounts would continue to accrue. The ISDA Amendment Agreement provides wording for parties to impose a time limit on 2A3. The FCA have indicated that this time period should be no longer than 90 days, and so any party subject to or potentially subject to regulation by the FCA should bear this in mind. The amendment agreement can be signed up to bilaterally by both parties to an ISDA agreement, or the operative provision can be included in any newly negotiated master agreement. It might be that amending the section affects the analysis of any netting opinion a party is seeking to rely upon, and so parties should carefully check this. Section 4A1 of the New York Law CSA, or the English Law Credit Support Deed, contains a condition precedent similar to that found in 2A3. Parties may therefore want to amend this in a similar way. Any amendment made to the ISDA Master Agreement will automatically be applied to any English Law Credit Support Annex, since this is annexed to the Master Agreement. Any other type of Master Agreement with provisions similar to 2A3, such as the JIMRA 2011, as well as various commodity and energy Master Agreements, can be amended similarly, using ISDA pro forma language. For more information on the amendment agreement, as well as an analysis by Guy Usher, a partner at Field Fisher, please refer to the LexisPSL Banking and Finance website. A link will be included at the end of this webcast.
Thanks very much, Emma. So now let's turn to structured finance and consider how the courts have interpreted the downgrade of AAA Notes and a subsequent upgrade as a trigger in a CLO deal. In the Napier Park and Harbourmaster case, the crux of was the interpretation of wording in the collateral management agreement, in particular paragraph 4.1, and the definition of reinvestment criteria. This included a condition that if the ratings of the Class A1 notes have been downgraded below their initial ratings, then certain sums had to be repaid early by borrowers under the underlying loan obligations would be used to redeem senior notes rather than being used for reinvestment in further collateral loan obligations. Harbourmaster, the issuer, acquired loan obligations and had issued 14 classes of notes from senior, mezzanine and junior notes due 2022. The Class A1 senior notes had an initial rating of AAA in August 2006, but had been downgraded to AA for over 2 years, then upgraded again back to AAA. There were two possible interpretations. Either, if the notes would be considered as having been downgraded, then any payment received into the structure as unscheduled principal proceeds, UPP, had to be used to redeem the notes by paying senior notes according to the payment waterfall. This was the approach which was favoured by the High Court. Or, if the notes were considered as not downgraded, then the UPP had to be used for reinvestment by the collateral manager buying further loan obligations according to specific criteria. This would mean that this would be available to pay down notes further down in the payment waterfall. This was the interpretation that Napier, a junior note holder, was basing its appeal before the Court of Appeal. It was decided by the Court of Appeal that the wording in 4.1 in the context of the commercial transaction meant that the ratings of the Class A1 notes was not considered as downgraded at the time when the test arose to decide how the UPP should be applied. So what were the consequences in this transaction? Well, Lord Justice Lewison concluded that the court should use an iterative approach by looking at the commercial context for interpretation of the section. So the Court of Appeal held that when the decision was made by the collateral manager, the notes had been reinstated to AAA rating. Therefore, the condition at that point had not been breached. So there was an obligation on the collateral manager to reinvest the UPP. The downgrade, therefore, had no contractual effect in the reinvestment period. All the scheduled payments had been used to pay the notes according to the waterfall. There was no guarantee of any UPP coming into the structure, as this was all due to borrowers deciding to repay early in the underlying loan obligations. The collateral manager did not have any discretion on reinvestment, and the senior note holders didn't have a right to redeem the notes. So if the condition was met, an obligation arose for the collateral manager to reinvest the UPP. So how is this relevant then in practice? Well, where there is a ratings downgrade which is subsequently reinstated, the interpretation of any condition or trigger linked to a downgrade may lead to different commercial consequences, so the drafting has to be as clear as possible. By following this iterative and commercial approach, wording can mean that a downgrade which is no longer in existence at the time of the test should be made on the basis of the rating at that time. Quite rightly, the Court of Appeal highlighted the meaning of a AAA rating, which means to be paid on time and in full, which is a forward-looking analysis taking into account projections relating to the underlying loan obligations. Using a previous historic downgrade as a trigger, which had been resolved by the time of a test, did not fall within the commercial context of the CLO transaction. So there we have a useful business decision from the Court of Appeal, and hopefully one to be followed. If you'd like to find out more about LexisPSL Banking and Finance, if you'd like to read our news analysis on these 3 issues, or look at our Loan Ranger blog, details will be at the end of this webcast. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you.